So as you know that the question of interest rate arises when you borrow money. And there are two main sources of borrowing money. The first is taking a loan from a bank, and the other is issuing bonds. So when you take a loan or when you issue bonds, you have to pay interest on the borrowed money, and you have to pay interest on the bonds that have been issued. So as I mentioned that there are two types of interest rates, a fixed interest rate and a floating interest rate. So the fixed interest rate means that you have issued bonds at 6% per annum. So every year you have to pay 6% interest on the bonds. The floating interest rate is different because here generally a benchmark interest rate is used, and that is called LIBOR. So you will learn more about LIBOR in the next slide. So let's talk about floating interest rate. Well, a floating interest rate is a short-term interest rate. And what is meant by short-term is that the interest rate fluctuates. So as you know very well that in the short-term market, interest rates change almost every day or every week or every month. So they are referred as floating interest rates. So now you can see that a floating interest rate is a short-term interest rates. It fluctuates frequently, and a base rate is used generally to structure the short-term interest, and that base rate is normally LIBOR. So LIBOR means London Interbank Offer Rate. So this rate is used as the base rate, and then you can say the interest rate is 1% plus LIBOR or 2% plus LIBOR. So that is how the floating interest rates are structured. So LIBOR is the London Interbank Offer Rate, and this is taken as the base for structuring floating interest rate. So as I said that the LIBOR is the rate at which banks borrow from each other, and it's the most frequently used short-term interest rate in the swap market. So the interest rate swap is actually a facility offered by swap dealers to the business community, that they can swap a fixed rate interest with a floating rate interest, and normally banks are involved in arranging the swap, and they charge a fee for providing this service. So what's actually happening is that firms can exchange their fixed rate interest obligations with floating rate interest through a swap dealer. And also reverse of it, that firms having floating rate interest obligations can exchange with fixed rate interest. So this is actually what swap means. There can be many reasons why firms enter into swap arrangements. Times firms are looking for cheaper finance, and by entering in the swap arrangement, they get what they want. And sometimes swap is a better arrangement than going direct to banks and asking for the borrowing. So it is quite possible for firms to go direct to another firm and negotiate a swap rather than using the services of an intermediary like a bank or a swap dealer. So you will notice through the example that follows that the swap arrangement results in benefit for the concerned parties. So we'll run through an example that will make you understand the concept of swaps. Okay guys, now let's run through an example, and let's assume that the company named Rexon Mobile has issued $100 million in floating rate bonds, and the interest on the bond is tied to a specific short-term interest rate. And in view of the volatile interest rate in the short-term market, Rexon wants to lock in the firm's interest expense. What it means actually is that the company wants to have a more stable and consistent interest rate rather than having a volatile interest rate in the short-term market. So now the company is considering various options, and one option is to buy back the floating rate bonds and replace them with fixed rate bonds. But you will appreciate that this will create cash flow problems for the company, because company has to arrange cash to buy back the floating rate bonds and then to issue fixed rate bonds. So that may not be a practical outcome. And also, when the company will issue fixed rate bonds, that will involve considerable expense to the company. So maybe it's not a workable alternative. So now a better solution is for the firm to enter in a hedge transaction with the swap dealer, and they can exchange their floating rate interest with a fixed rate interest. How that is done, we'll refer to the rate available in the swap market, and as it's given here that the rate is LIBOR for 5% fixed. What it means is that the LIBOR rate is equal to 5% interest rate, which is a fixed rate of interest. So the arrangement is like this, that the company will be paying 5% rate of interest on the 100 million bonds, and it will receive the LIBOR rate on the same $100 million through the swap dealer. So now the situation is like this, that the firm has entered into a contract with the swap dealer, and the situation of these two parties is that of counterparties in the swap. So the arrangement is like this, that the firm pays the dealer 5% on $100 million and receives LIBOR rate on $100 million. So the situation is like this, that the net cash payment to the dealer is 0.05, which is the fixed rate, minus the LIBOR rate times $100 million. And If the LIBOR exceeds 5%, the firm receives money from the dealer. And if the LIBOR is less than 5%, the firm pays money to the dealer. So you can see that the commitment between the firm and the swap dealer is that the firm is paying a fixed rate of 5% on $100 million. And if the LIBOR rate fluctuates upwards or downwards, the firm is either receiving the difference between 5% and LIBOR, or the firm is paying the difference between 5% and the LIBOR rate. So this tabulation shows you various LIBOR rates, 4.5%, 5%, and 5.5%, and the interest amount is shown below: $4.5 million, $5 million, and $5.5 million. That is the LIBOR rate times $100 million. And then down below, you got the cash payments. In the first column, it is $0.5 million. In the second column, it is 0. And in the third column, it is minus $0.5 million. And then if you look at the bottom line, it shows total payment, $5 million in the first column, $5 million in the second column, and $5 million in the third column. So what is happening? If you again look at the first figure up, that is $4.5 million, you can see that this is less than $5 million, which is the fixed interest that the firm has to pay to the swap dealer. So the short-term rate is less than the fixed rate, so the firm has to pay the difference to the swap dealer. And if you move to the second column, at 5%, the firm doesn't have to pay anything, and neither it has to receive anything, because the LIBOR rate and the fixed rate are same: 5% LIBOR, 5% fixed rate. If you look at the third column, here the situation is different. The LIBOR rate has gone up to 5.5%, is more than the fixed rate of 5%. So the firm will now receive $0.5 million from the swap dealer. So this tabulation makes it very clear for you to understand the mechanics as to how the swap works between the firm and the swap dealer. So let's look at the outcome of this transaction between the firm and the swap dealer. As you can see that the swap dealer has transformed the floating rate bond into a synthetic fixed rate debt with an effective coupon rate of 5%. And the firm has hedged its interest rate exposure without actually having to replace its fixed rate bond with fixed rate bonds. So that is the outcome of this transaction, without having to buy back the floating rate bonds and then issue the fixed rate bonds, which will involve a lot of hassle, cash flow problems, cost of issuing the fixed rate bonds. The firm has avoided all these hassles, and they just entered in a swap deal with a swap dealer, and it's a very amicable arrangement and very simple solution, and the firm has got what they actually wanted. The firm wanted a stable and consistent interest rate, so they got that stable interest rate of 5% with this swap transaction. So that is a facility available to the businessmen, to the companies and firms, and the swap works all over the world, and it's a very simple solution to the requirements of the firms and counterparties. So now you can see that how a businessman can rearrange its balance sheet, income statement, and the cash flow. Now the question that arises is, what's the benefit to the swap dealer? So the swap dealer benefits from the spread between bid rate and ask rate. And how it works, as you can see that the firm pays 5% to the swap dealer, and now the swap dealer will look for some other firm who is interested in having a fixed rate. So the dealer will pass on the fixed rate to the firm and receive in return the LIBOR rate from the firm. So the dealer will pay something like 4.9% rate to that firm, and the difference between 5% received and 4.9% paid, the difference is 0.1%. That is the spread, and that is the financial gain to the swap dealer. So now the situation is like this, that the dealer has a transaction with a firm where it pays a fixed rate and receives floating rate in return, and the dealer has a transaction with another firm where it pays floating rate and receives fixed rate. So that is how the swap dealer work, and the return to the swap dealer is the difference between the fixed rate received and the fixed rate paid, which is 0.1% of the principal sum involved in the swap. All right, let's run through this example of two firms, and they enter in an agreement to swap their interest rate obligations. The situation is like this, that loan available, the name of the company. So as you can see that if Mars company applies for fixed rate loan, so the rate of interest charge is 10%, and if MPHIL applies for fixed rate loan, the rate charge is 11.5%. Similarly, the situation as far as the variable rate is concerned is 7.25% for Mars and 7.50% for MPHIL. Now the question is why there are difference in the rates charged to the two firms? Well, it all depends on the nature of the business, the size of the company, the dealings with the banks. So there are several factors that influence the rates that are charged by banks to different companies. So the situation that is available here is shown in this tabulation. And now let us see that how it works, the swap. Well, actually, Maersk is borrowing 1 million at the fixed rate of 10%, and MPHIL is borrowing 1 million at the variable rate, that is 7.50. And then they swap the interest between themselves. So Maersk assumes payment on variable loan at 7.5%, and MPHIL assumes payments on fixed loan at 10.75%. So now you can see that this tabulation shows the position as far as Maersk company is concerned. And you can see that Marx took the fixed interest loan at 10%, but then when he swapped the loan with the MPHIL company is paying 10.75%. So that means as far as the fixed rate is concerned, Marx company is benefiting by 0.75%. Then when we come to the variable rate, you can see that the Marx company is paying the rate 7.50%, and if you look at the rate that was available to Marx company, the variable rate, it was 7.25%. So that means as far as the variable rate is concerned, Marx is paying 0.25 more to MPHIL company. So if you offset that against the benefit in the fixed rate of 0.75, the net benefit is plus 0.50% to Marx company. All right, let's consider the situation as far as MPHIL company is concerned. As you can see that the variable rate available to MPHIL was 7.50%, and MPHIL took the loan at 7.50. So as you know that the variable interest rate was swapped with Marx company, and Marx company is paying 7.50, so that is plus 7.50. That completely offsets the minus 7.50. That was the rate available to MPHIL company. And coming down to the fixed rate of interest, so MPHIL is paying 10.75% to Marx company, and if you look at the rate that was available to MPHIL company, that was 11.50%. So you can see that MPHIL is in a benefit situation of 0.75%. So that is the net benefit available to MPHIL company. Well, guys, I hope you benefited from this presentation. It clearly shows how the interest rate swap works, and the situation when a swap dealer is involved in between, or when a company goes direct to another company and swaps the interest rate. I hope you are benefited. Thank you.